Story number 1. Whispers in the Snow. Winter in Cabin Creek was not merely a season. It was an existence. Nestled in the heart of Colorado, the small town was encased in a relentless blanket of snow, isolating its inhabitants from the outside world. The wooden houses stood like silent sentinels against the biting cold, their logs weathered by countless winters. Among them was the Bennett family's home, a charming, albeit aging, structure that had witnessed generations of joy and sorrow. I remember that winter of 1976 as if it were yesterday, even though decades have passed. My name is Jack Bennett, the youngest son of the Bennett family. Looking back, I realized that our story was destined to become a dark legend whispered among the townsfolk for years to come. It was the first heavy snowfall of the season, and Cabin Creek was transforming into a winter wonderland overnight. The streets, usually bustling with the warmth of community gatherings, were now eerily silent under the thick layer of snow. My parents, Robert and Margaret, were preparing for the harsh months ahead, ensuring the heating systems were in top condition and stocking up on essentials. My older sister, Emily, was busy with her school projects, and I was more interested in the thrill of sledding down the nearest hill. That night, the storm hit with a ferocity I had never seen before. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the snow fell in relentless sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. The power flickered and then died, plunging our home into darkness. Margaret hurried to light candles and ensure we had enough warmth, while Robert checked the generators, cursing the timing of the outage. As the hours dragged on, the storm showed no signs of abating. We huddled together in the living room, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The howling wind seemed to penetrate every corner of the house, making it feel as though something was out there, trying to break in. Around midnight, a loud banging echoed from the front door. My heart raced as I glanced at my parents and Emily. "Maybe it's just the wind," my father suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Margaret shook her head, her eyes wide with concern. "It doesn't sound like the wind. Someone could be out there." Emily grabbed a flashlight, her hands trembling slightly. "I'll check," she offered, determination masking her fear. I wanted to follow her, to be brave, but my legs felt like lead. Reluctantly, I watched as she approached the door, her figure swallowed by the swirling snow outside. Seconds stretched into minutes before a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, followed by an ear-splitting crash from the kitchen. Panic surged through me as I bolted from the living room, my feet pounding against the wooden floor. I found my parents and Emily already running towards the kitchen, their faces pale and eyes wide with terror. The kitchen was a scene of chaos, pots and pans strewn across the floor, glass shattered everywhere. My parents were on the floor, unconscious, and Emily stood frozen near the broken window, her flashlight dim and trembling. "It's the storm," Margaret gasped, trying to regain consciousness. "It's just the storm." But deep down, I knew it was something else. The screams, the banging, something had invaded our home that night. I grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around myself, pulling my parents to their feet. "We need to stay calm," I whispered, though my voice shook with fear. "We have to wait until morning." Hours passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. The storm raged on, the wind now sounding like tortured souls screaming in agony. Occasionally, I heard footsteps on the roof, scraping and thudding against the wood. Each noise sent a fresh wave of dread through my body, convincing me that whatever was in our house was still lurking, hungry for something. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to wane, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. We carefully made our way out of the kitchen, the tension easing slightly as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the darkness. But our relief was short-lived. The house was eerily quiet, the aftermath of the night's terror evident everywhere. In the living room, a large, dark stain spread across the carpet, and in the kitchen, remnants of broken glass glittered ominously in the morning light. My parents and Emily remained unconscious, their bodies unnaturally stiff, as if they had been frozen in time. We called for help, but the storm had cut off all communication lines. Hours later, the neighbors arrived, drawn by the commotion and the unmistakable signs of violence. The local sheriff, a stern man named Tom Harris, surveyed the scene with a grim expression. "There's no sign of forced entry," he observed, kneeling beside my parents. "No weapon marks. No evidence of a struggle beyond what happened during the storm." I watched in horror as the sheriff and his deputies worked to revive my family. But it was too late. My parents and Emily had been killed, their bodies showing no signs of external wounds. It was as if something invisible had attacked us, leaving behind only the marks of a brutal, unseen force. The investigation was swift yet baffling. There were no clues to the identity of the murderer, no witnesses who had seen anything through the storm. The only piece of evidence was the large, dark stain on the living room carpet, a gruesome reminder of that fateful night. The case went cold, the mystery of the Cabin Creek murders remaining unsolved for decades. Years later, Cabin Creek had changed. The old Bennett house stood abandoned, its windows boarded up and the once vibrant garden now overtaken by snow and ice. The townsfolk rarely spoke of what had happened, their memories clouded by time and the fear of revisiting the past. But the legend lived on, whispered in hushed tones around fireplaces and in the shadows of the town's oldest buildings. I couldn't let go of the memories, the unanswered questions gnawing at my sanity. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to Cabin Creek, driven by a need to make sense of the horror that had destroyed my family. The house, though dilapidated, still held an unsettling presence, as if the very walls remembered the screams and the anguish of that night. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. I wandered through the rooms, each one a frozen snapshot of a life abruptly ended. In the living room, the dark stain was still present, a macabre scar on the once cozy carpet. I took photos, documenting the remnants of the tragedy. But no matter how much I tried to piece together the events, the truth remained elusive. One night, as I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the wind outside began to howl once more, the sound eerily reminiscent of that stormy night. My heart raced as I heard the familiar banging on the door, followed by the sound of footsteps on the roof. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling, and approached the door, fear coursing through me. The door swung open, revealing nothing but the swirling snow and the fading light of day. I stepped outside, the cold biting into my skin, and scanned the surroundings for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a faint scream pierced the night, sending chills down my spine. It was the same scream I had heard all those years ago, a desperate cry that echoed through the frozen landscape. I followed the sound, my footsteps crunching against the snow-covered ground. The scream led me to the edge of the forest, where the trees loomed like dark sentinels against the night sky. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the temperature seemed to drop further, the cold more intense, as if something was trying to drive me away. In the heart of the forest, I stumbled upon a clearing, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow on the snow. There, in the center, stood a figure tall and shadowy, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness. The same hollow eyes that had haunted me all those years stared back at me, filled with an unbearable sorrow. "Help me," the figure whispered, its voice a haunting echo carried by the wind. "Find my family." I recoiled, fear gripping me as the realization dawned. This was the spirit of my father, Margaret, and Emily, forever trapped in the snow, seeking redemption for their untimely deaths. Tears welled in my eyes as I reached out, desperate to comfort them, but my hand passed through their ghostly forms, leaving me alone in the cold night. The wind howled louder, and the figure began to fade, its cries growing fainter. "Find the truth," it implored, "and set us free." I knew then that the only way to find peace for my family and myself was to uncover the hidden secrets of Cabin Creek. What had truly happened that night? Why had the murderer vanished without a trace? And why were my family's spirits bound to the frozen landscape? Forever yearning for closure? Determined to put an end to the haunting, I delved deeper into the town's history, unearthing forgotten tales and long-buried secrets. I discovered that the Bennetts had been well respected, their lives intertwined with the fabric of Cabin Creek. But beneath the surface, there were whispers of jealousy, betrayal, and a dark past that had been carefully concealed. One name stood out amidst the shadows: Harold Green, a neighbor who had always harbored a grudge against my father. Our families had feuded over land disputes and business rivalries, the animosity simmering beneath polite smiles and forced cordiality. As I pieced together the fragments of the past, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Harold had orchestrated the murders, driven by a twisted desire to ruin the Bennetts and claim their legacy for himself. With this revelation, I felt a surge of determination. Harold had vanished years ago, his whereabouts unknown, but the spirits had remained, trapped by his unholy act. I knew that finding him was the key to ending the curse that bound my family's souls to Cabin Creek. I began searching for any trace of Harold, digging through old records, interviewing elderly residents who remembered the feud, and following leads that led me to forgotten corners of the town. One cold evening, months after my return, I received a tip from an old fisherman who had once known Harold. He pointed me towards a secluded cabin deep within the forest, a place where Harold had once lived before disappearing without a trace. Armed with my resolve and the knowledge that I was close to the truth, I set out once more into the snow-covered woods, determined to confront the man who had torn my family apart. The journey was arduous, the path obscured by thick snow and the relentless winter chill. As I approached the cabin, I felt a sense of foreboding, the air thick with the weight of past atrocities. The cabin stood alone, its windows dark and lifeless, the door hanging slightly ajar as if inviting me in. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously, and stepped inside. The interior was eerily silent, the air heavy with the scent of decay and the lingering presence of malevolence. In the dim light, I saw signs of a hasty departure: broken furniture, scattered belongings, and a chilling sense of abandonment. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the walls, and I felt eyes watching me from the darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows: Harold Green, his face twisted with rage and madness. "You shouldn't have come here," he spat, his voice filled with hatred. The Bennetts were mine for the taking. I stood my ground, the weight of my family's sorrow fueling my courage. "Harold, please, let us rest. What you did was wrong. Release us from this curse." His eyes gleamed with a feral intensity, and he lunged at me, his movements swift and brutal. We struggled, the cold biting into my skin as we fought amidst the remnants of his twisted sanctuary. In the chaos, I managed to overpower him, pinning him to the ground. "It's over," I declared, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You have to let us go." Harold's face contorted in anguish and desperation. "You don't understand," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They deserved it. The Bennetts ruined everything for me." As I looked into his haunted eyes, I realized that his madness had been fueled by years of bitterness and resentment, leading him to commit an unspeakable act that had left a permanent scar on our lives. I knew that simply defeating him wouldn't be enough to free my family's spirits. Desperate for a solution, I remembered the stories the townsfolk had shared, rituals and prayers to appease restless spirits and break the chains of curses. I found an old book in the cabin's attic, a tattered tome filled with ancient incantations and rites for cleansing and redemption. With the book in hand, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I began the ritual, chanting the words of forgiveness and release, my voice echoing through the silent cabin. The air grew thick with energy, the spirits of my family appearing around me, their faces serene and grateful. Harold watched in silent agony as the ritual unfolded, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. Help them. I continued the chant, pouring all my sorrow and love into the words. The cabin seemed to glow with a warm light, dispelling the darkness and filling the space with a sense of peace. The spirits of my family moved towards the light, their forms dissolving into the air with smiles of gratitude. As the final words of the ritual left my lips, the presence of the malevolent force dissipated, and the cabin was left in a peaceful silence. Harold collapsed, his body shaking with the release of years of pent-up torment. I knew that he had finally found peace as well, his spirit freed from the chains of hatred that had bound him for so long. I left Cabin Creek that day with a heavy heart and a sense of closure I had never thought possible. The legend of the Cabin Creek murders was finally put to rest, the truth unveiled, and the spirits of the Bennetts and Harold Green finding the peace they had long been denied. But the memory of that winter lingered, a reminder of the darkness that can fester in the coldest of places and the enduring power of love and forgiveness. Years later, the old Bennett house was rebuilt, its wooden beams strong and welcoming, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The town of Cabin Creek moved forward, the past slowly fading into memory, but the lessons learned remained etched in the hearts of those who had witnessed the horrors of that winter. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the pine trees and the snow blankets the land in silence, I still hear the faint whispers of my family, their voices a soothing balm against the lingering shadows of the past. They remind me that some stories are not meant to be forgotten, that even in the darkest of winters, the light of hope and redemption can pierce through the coldest of nights. Because in the heart of Cabin Creek, amidst the endless snow and the quiet whispers, the legacy of that tragic winter lives on, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of love, loss, and the unyielding quest for peace. Story number 2. Whispers in the Pines. The Smoky Mountains stood majestic against the winter sky, their peaks cloaked in a blanket of white that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. I still remember the excitement that bubbled within me and my friends as we embarked on our winter retreat. Cabin Creek was the perfect getaway, a secluded wooden house nestled deep within the forest, promising solitude and the thrill of untouched wilderness. My name is Alex Turner, and this is the story of that fateful winter, a tale that would forever haunt my memories and the hearts of those who shared that chilling experience. We were 5 friends, bound by years of camaraderie and a shared love for adventure. Emma, the pragmatic one; Jake, the jokester; Lily, the sensitive artist; Mike, the skeptic; and me, the storyteller. When the opportunity arose to rent Cabin Creek for a month-long retreat, we jumped at the chance without a second thought. The house was everything we had hoped for: charming, rustic, and isolated, surrounded by towering pines and the serene beauty of untouched snow. The interior was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace, cozy furnishings, and panoramic windows offering breathtaking views of the winter landscape. We spent the first day settling in, unpacking our gear, and exploring the immediate surroundings. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. That night, as we sat around the fireplace sharing stories and sipping hot cocoa, the wind outside began to howl, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the house. It was a typical winter storm, fierce but manageable. We laughed off the increasing intensity, attributing it to the natural forces of the season. As midnight approached, the storm reached its peak. The wind howled like a chorus of restless spirits, and snowflakes whipped against the windows with relentless fury. We decided to retire for the night, retreating to our respective rooms with the promise of another day of fun and relaxation. I lay in my bunk, the sound of the storm lulling me into a restless sleep. Hours passed, and the house remained eerily quiet. Suddenly, a soft thudding echoed from the attic above. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, the sound growing louder and more deliberate. It was unmistakable footsteps on the wooden floorboards, heavy and purposeful. I nudged Emma, who was curled up beside me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. She sat up, eyes wide with concern. "Yeah, it sounded like footsteps. Maybe someone got in." Jake, ever the skeptic, chuckled from across the room. "Probably just the wind messing with the old house. Don't worry about it." But Lily looked uneasy, her artistic intuition sensing something amiss. "What if it's not the wind? What if someone, or something, is up there?" Mike rolled his eyes, dismissing her fears. "Come on, Lily. There's no one here but us. Maybe you're just imagining things." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the only sound the relentless storm outside. I tried to convince myself that it was just our minds playing tricks, but the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, I decided to investigate. Quietly, I made my way up the narrow staircase to the attic. Each step creaked ominously under my weight, the sound amplified by the silence that enveloped the house. The attic door stood slightly ajar, the darkness within swallowing the faint light from below. I pushed the door open, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and forgotten memories. The air was thick with the scent of mothballs and decay. As I scanned the room, the sound of footsteps ceased, replaced by a chilling silence that pressed in on me from all sides. Just as I was about to turn back, a shadow darted across the far corner of the attic, disappearing into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the void, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Heart pounding, I hurried downstairs, convincing myself that it was just a trick of the light or perhaps one of Jake's pranks. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene but icy landscape. We gathered in the living room, the tension from the previous night still palpable. As we discussed what had happened, Jake and Mike remained dismissive, while Emma and Lily seemed genuinely frightened. "Maybe it was just the old house settling," Jake suggested, trying to lighten the mood, but Lily shook her head. It felt too real, like something was there. Before we could delve deeper into the discussion, Emma pointed out something outside the window. "Look at the snow. There are footprints leading from the forest right up to the house." I peered out, following her gaze. In the fresh snow, large, deep footprints stretched from the edge of the woods, winding their way to our doorstep. They were unlike any human footprints we had seen before, massive, with elongated toes and an unnatural stride. "No one would make footprints that big," Mike observed, his skepticism wavering, "especially not in this kind of snowstorm." We all stared at the prints in disbelief. "But where are they going?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with unease. The footprints stopped abruptly at our front door, but there was no sign of anyone leaving. A sense of dread settled over us as we realized that someone, or something, had approached our home, but had not left. Determined to uncover the truth, we decided to conduct a thorough search of the property. Armed with flashlights and a growing sense of trepidation, we split into pairs to cover more ground. I paired up with Lily, while Emma stayed with Jake and Mike. As I ventured into the woods, the wind seemed to carry whispers, faint and indistinct, as if the trees themselves were trying to communicate. The footprints in the snow grew more pronounced the deeper we went, leading us to a clearing where the forest opened up to reveal an old, abandoned cabin. The cabin looked dilapidated, its windows broken and door hanging off its hinges. An eerie silence enveloped the area, broken only by the distant call of a lone owl. We approached cautiously, the footprints stopping at the edge of the clearing. Inside, the cabin was a relic of a bygone era. Furniture was covered in white sheets, and cobwebs adorned every corner. As we explored, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with an unspoken sorrow. In the center of the room stood a dusty mirror, the surface cracked and smeared with age. Lily approached the mirror, her reflection wavering as the cold seemed to seep into her bones. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to the mirror. I leaned in, my breath visible in the frigid air. In the reflection, I saw not just our own images, but ghostly figures standing behind us. Shadowy apparitions with hollow eyes and lifeless expressions. They moved silently, their presence sending a chill down my spine. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here." As we turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind blew through the cabin, slamming the door shut with a deafening crash. The temperature dropped even further, our breaths turning to ice crystals in the air. The ghostly figures began to move towards us, their whispers growing louder, filling the room with a cacophony of sorrow and anger. Panicking, we tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The apparitions closed in, their presence suffocating. Desperation set in as we realized we were trapped, caught in the grip of something malevolent. Meanwhile, Emma, Jake, and Mike were experiencing their own horrors inside the main house. The sounds of footsteps and whispers echoed through the rooms, growing louder and more insistent. Jake, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize the noises, but even he couldn't deny the fear in his friend's eyes. Suddenly, Emma screamed, drawing the attention of Jake and Mike. They rushed to her side, finding her staring in horror at a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, his presence cold and unyielding. "We need to leave," Emma cried, her voice breaking. "Now!" But the doors and windows were locked tight, the cold wind howling like the cries of lost souls. Panic turned to terror as they realized they were not alone, that something was determined to keep them inside. Back at the abandoned cabin, Lily and I struggled against the unyielding door, the ghostly apparitions closing in around us. Just as all hope seemed lost, a blinding light filled the room, accompanied by a powerful surge of warmth. The spirits recoiled, their forms dissolving into the light as a force beyond our understanding pushed them away. The door to the cabin swung open, the oppressive atmosphere lifting in an instant. We stumbled out into the clearing, gasping for breath, the footprints fading behind us as if they had never existed. The storm had subsided, leaving the night calm and peaceful once more. We reunited with Emma, Jake, and Mike in the main house, the horrors of that night etched into our souls. The footprints in the snow had vanished, and the house stood silent, the malevolent presence gone as suddenly as it had appeared. Exhausted and traumatized, we huddled together, trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded. In the days that followed, we delved into the history of Cabin Creek, uncovering stories of tragedy and loss that had long been forgotten. The legend spoke of a family that had lived in the very house we had rented, their lives torn apart by a mysterious and violent force. Neighbors had reported hearing screams and seeing shadowy figures during winter storms, but the truth had remained elusive. Determined to bring closure to the restless spirits and free ourselves from the lingering fear, we sought out the remnants of the past. We returned to the abandoned cabin, now a symbol of our ordeal, and laid flowers at the doorstep, a silent apology to the souls that had been disturbed. As we left the woods, the first signs of spring began to thaw the frozen landscape, the snow melting away to reveal the vibrant life beneath. The horrors of that winter lingered in our minds, a constant reminder of the thin veil between our world and the supernatural. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memories remain vivid, etched into the fabric of my being. The bond forged in the face of terror has held us together, a testament to the strength of friendship and the resilience of the human spirit. Cabin Creek stands as a silent witness to our ordeal, its wooden walls holding secrets that will forever remain a part of our lives. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the Smoky Mountains and the snow begins to fall, I catch a faint whisper on the breeze, a reminder of that night when we faced the unknown and survived the whispers in the pines. And I know, deep down, that some places are better left undisturbed, their secrets hidden beneath layers of snow and time. For in the heart of the wilderness, the echoes of the past linger, waiting for the unwary to uncover their haunting truths. Story number 3. Eyes in the portrait. I always dreamed of escaping the relentless pace of city life. The endless honking. The perpetual gray skies obscured by smog. The ceaseless hustle. Each day felt like a battle against time itself. So, when the opportunity arose to purchase an old wooden house in the remote countryside of Maine, I seized it without hesitation. Cabin Hollow was exactly what I needed. Solitude, tranquility, and a chance to reconnect with myself during the long winter months. The house stood proudly at the edge of a dense forest, its weathered shingles and creaky porch evoking a sense of timelessness. I remember the first night vividly, the way the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of pine sap and wood smoke. The interior was charmingly rustic, with hardwood floors, a large stone fireplace, and antique furnishings that hinted at generations past. In the living room, above the mantelpiece, hung a large portrait of a woman. Her eyes were strikingly lifelike, so much so that they seemed to follow me around the room. The frame was ornate, gilded in tarnished gold, and the painting itself was impeccably detailed. Despite my admiration for its artistry, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling about the portrait. There was something about her gaze, an intensity that felt almost accusatory, that made me hesitant to move it. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the house settled into a rhythm of quiet solitude. I spent my time reading, writing, and exploring the surrounding wilderness. The forest was both beautiful and foreboding, a place where shadows played tricks on the mind and the silence was almost deafening. It wasn't long before I began to notice subtle changes in my perception of the house and the portrait. It started with the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I felt her eyes boring into me from the painting. No matter where I stood, it was as if she was watching my every move, her expression unreadable yet undeniably present. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, fueled by the isolation and the long nights, but the sensation grew stronger with each passing night. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that her eyes were still fixed on me. The house seemed to breathe around me, the walls groaning with the weight of untold stories. I found myself avoiding the living room altogether, unable to face the portrait that had become a source of constant unease. One particularly cold night, as a heavy snowstorm raged outside, I decided I had to confront my fears. I approached the living room with a mixture of dread and determination, the wind howling like a chorus of unseen spirits. The fireplace was warm, casting flickering shadows that danced across the room. The portrait stood unchanged, its eyes glimmering in the firelight. I reached out a hand, my fingers trembling, and slowly lifted the portrait from the wall. The frame was heavier than I had expected, the glass cold to the touch. As I removed it, a draft of icy air rushed past me, carrying with it a faint, sorrowful whisper. My heart pounded in my chest as I placed the portrait on the mantel, trying to steady my racing thoughts. But as soon as the painting was freed from its perch, the room seemed to shift, the temperature plummeted, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. I felt a presence behind me, a chill that wasn't from the cold. Turning around, I froze. Hidden behind the fireplace was a narrow doorway, almost invisible against the dark wood. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I pushed aside the heavy drapes and approached the hidden door. It was small, barely large enough to crawl through, but I could hear faint sounds emanating from within, whispers, footsteps, and the distant echo of a woman's voice. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and turned the ancient knob, the door creaking open with a reluctant groan. Beyond the door lay a narrow staircase, leading down into the darkness. My flashlight barely penetrated the blackness, casting long, wavering beams across the damp stone walls. Each step I took seemed to amplify the sounds below, the whispers growing louder, more distinct. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, a stark contrast to the fresh, crisp winter air above. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, hidden room. The space was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and remnants of lives long past. In the center stood a worn wooden coffin, its surface etched with intricate designs that mirrored the ornate frame of the portrait above. My pulse quickened as I approached the coffin, the whispers reaching a crescendo of sorrow and despair. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid, the hinges squealing in protest. Inside lay the remains of the woman from the portrait, her skeletal frame frozen in eternal repose. Her hands were still clasped together, fingers intertwined as if in prayer, and her eyes seemed to stare up at me even in death. The room was cold, the chill seeping into my bones, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness wash over me. As I stood there, trying to make sense of the horror before me, the whispers began to coalesce into clear, anguished words. "Release us," they cried, a plea that resonated deep within my soul. "Free us from this prison." Tears welled in my eyes as I realized the truth. The woman in the portrait had been bound to the house, her spirit trapped in the painting, unable to move on. The portrait had been a conduit, a vessel that kept her presence alive but confined. The whispers were her attempts to reach out, to find someone who could help her find peace. Determined to break the curse, I knew what I had to do. I gathered the remains, placing them gently in the coffin, and began to recite prayers of release and forgiveness. The room grew colder, the air thick with the weight of unspoken pain. But I pressed on, driven by a need to set her free. As the final words left my lips, a brilliant light filled the room, banishing the darkness and the oppressive chill. The whispers faded into silence, replaced by a profound sense of calm. The coffin lid closed gently, and the portrait on the mantel seemed to shimmer, the woman's eyes softening with gratitude. I left the hidden room, the house feeling lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. The portrait no longer felt like a source of unease, but rather a memorial to a tragic soul finally at peace. The nights grew quiet once more, the eyes in the painting no longer following me with an unsettling intensity. Months passed, and the memory of that night became a distant echo. The house remained a sanctuary, a place of solitude and reflection, free from the haunting presence that had once terrorized me. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of her eyes in the portrait, a silent reminder of the sorrow and redemption that had unfolded within those wooden walls. One winter evening, as I sat by the fireplace, the wind howling outside, I noticed a small, weathered diary tucked away in a corner of the attic. Curious, I opened it to find entries written by a woman named Eleanor, detailing her life and her tragic fate. It became clear that Eleanor had been the one in the portrait, a woman who had met a cruel end and whose spirit had been bound to the house. Reading her words, I felt a deep connection to her pain and her longing for release. It was then that I understood the true power of compassion and the importance of remembering those who had been forgotten by time. Eleanor had found peace, but her story needed to be told, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring bonds that transcend even death. As I continue to live in Cabin Hollow, the house stands as a silent witness to the past, a place where sorrow and redemption intertwine. The portrait of Eleanor remains a cherished piece of art, a symbol of hope and the triumph of the spirit over the darkness that once threatened to consume us all. And on quiet winter nights, when the wind whispers through the pines and the snow blankets the earth in silence, I sometimes hear Eleanor's soft voice carried on the breeze, a gentle reminder that some souls never truly fade away. They linger in the places they loved, forever a part of the stories that bind us together, echoing through the ages with whispers of love, loss, and the unyielding quest for peace. Story number 4. Whispers in the Frost. Winter in Alaska is a relentless beast, unforgiving and unyielding. The landscape transforms into an endless expanse of white, where the horizon blurs into the heavens. and the silence is so profound it feels almost tangible. My name is David Mitchell, and this is the story of the night I spent in the abandoned wooden house on the outskirts of Denali National Park, a night that would forever alter my understanding of solitude and the supernatural. I had always been drawn to the wild, the untouched corners of the world where nature reigned supreme and humanity was but a fleeting presence. As an avid explorer and amateur photographer, I sought out places where few dared to tread, hoping to capture the raw beauty of untouched wilderness. Denali, with its towering peaks and vast, icy terrains, was the ultimate destination for my next expedition. The winter of 1985 was particularly harsh, with temperatures plummeting to record lows and blizzards sweeping across the region with alarming frequency. I had planned a solo trip, armed with my camera, supplies, and a sturdy pack, intending to document the winter's fury and the serene desolation it brought. However, as the days progressed, the weather worsened beyond what any forecast had predicted, forcing me to reconsider my plans. On the third day of my journey, a particularly vicious blizzard descended upon Denali, reducing visibility to mere feet and turning the landscape into a whiteout. My GPS was unreliable amidst the swirling snow, and my map had become almost illegible under the relentless assault of the storm. Desperate for shelter, I spotted a faint outline through the blinding white, an old wooden house, seemingly untouched by time, standing solitary against the tempest. Exhausted and hypothermic, I made my way toward the structure, each step a battle against the biting cold and the howling wind. The house appeared abandoned, its windows dark and boarded up, the wooden planks worn smooth by years of exposure to the elements. The front door, surprisingly intact, stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously, and stepped into the foyer. The interior was thick with dust, the air heavy with the scent of decay and stale wood. My flashlight beam danced across the rooms, revealing remnants of past lives, faded photographs, cracked furniture, and an old oil lamp perched on a mantel. It was clear that no one had lived here for decades, yet the house felt strangely preserved, as if frozen in time. Setting up a temporary camp in the living room, I huddled near the fireplace, grateful for the semblance of warmth it provided. As the night deepened, the storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits. I attempted to distract myself by organizing my gear and jotting down notes for my photographs, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Around midnight, I heard it, the soft, rhythmic dripping of water somewhere upstairs. Despite the absence of any apparent source, my heart raced as I tried to rationalize the sound. Perhaps a leak in the roof, or an animal seeking shelter. I dismissed it initially, focusing instead on the storm outside and the pressing need to stay warm. But the sounds grew more frequent, more deliberate. Footsteps, slow and measured, echoing through the wooden floors. My skin prickled with unease as I realized I wasn't alone. I strained to listen, but the house remained silent except for the persistent dripping and the storm's fury outside. Gathering my courage, I decided to investigate. Grabbing my flashlight, I ascended the creaky staircase, each step groaning under my weight. The hallway was dimly lit by the faint glow of the oil lamp, casting long shadows that danced menacingly on the walls. At the end of the corridor, a room stood slightly ajar, the door barely closed. I approached cautiously, the beam of my flashlight revealing an old bedroom. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single bed draped in a moth-eaten blanket and a dresser covered in a thick layer of dust. As I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt an inexplicable sense of being watched. Suddenly, the oil lamp flickered to life, its flame sputtering despite having no fuel added. The room was bathed in an eerie, warm light, the shadows receding unnaturally, my breath visible in the cold air. I turned towards the window, expecting to see nothing more than the storm's aftermath. Instead, my eyes met the lifeless gaze of a portrait hanging on the far wall. The painting depicted a woman in Victorian attire, her eyes hauntingly lifelike, seeming to follow me as I moved. Her expression was serene yet sorrowful, a stark contrast to the desolate room. I felt a shiver of discomfort, the feeling that her eyes held secrets too dark to comprehend. Before I could ponder further, a soft whisper echoed through the room, barely audible over the storm. "Help me," it pleaded, the voice filled with despair. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, flashlight darting across the room. But no one was there. The whispers continued, growing slightly louder, as if emanating from the very walls. Terrified, I backed away from the portrait, feeling the oppressive weight of unseen eyes upon me. The whispers intensified, forming coherent words that sent chills down my spine. "Find me." Determined to uncover the source of the haunting, I examined the room more closely. Behind the portrait, I noticed a faint outline, a hidden panel in the wall, slightly ajar. My curiosity overcame my fear as I reached out to push it open, revealing a narrow passageway leading into darkness. With a deep breath, I stepped into the hidden corridor, the whispers following me like a dark shadow. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, the air growing colder with each step. My flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as if struggling against the darkness that enveloped me. At the end of the corridor, I found a door slightly ajar, much like the one before. Pushing it open, I entered a small, dimly lit room. In the center stood a dusty table, on which lay an old journal and a flickering candle. The candle's flame danced erratically, casting flickering shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. I approached the table, picking up the journal with trembling hands. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. The entries detailed the life of Eleanor Thompson, the woman in the portrait, revealing a tragic story of love, loss, and despair. It became clear that Eleanor had been the original occupant of the house, her spirit bound to the portrait after a series of unspeakable tragedies that had befallen her family. As I read her final entries, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candle flame extinguished, plunging me into darkness. The whispers returned, louder and more urgent. "Release us," they cried, the voices intertwining in a chorus of sorrow. Desperate to help, I searched the room for a clue. Behind the table, I found an old locket, its surface engraved with Eleanor's initials. Opening it, I discovered a faded photograph of her and a man, their faces filled with happiness and hope. The realization hit me. Eleanor and her family had been trapped in this house, their spirits unable to move on due to a curse born from betrayal and tragedy. Determined to break the curse, I knew what I had to do. I retrieved the journal, the locket, and the photograph, feeling the weight of Eleanor's sorrow pressing down on me. As I turned to leave, the room began to shake, the whispers turning into anguished screams. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the air grew thick with despair. I fled the hidden room, racing back through the corridor and out of the house, the storm now a distant roar behind me. The whispers followed, their voices echoing in my mind as I stumbled through the snow-covered landscape, the cold biting into my skin. Every step felt like a battle against an unseen force, the memory of Eleanor's pleading eyes haunting my every move. When I finally reached my campsite, exhausted and broken, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the frozen landscape. I packed my gear, my mind reeling from the night's horrors, and vowed never to return to Cabin Hollow. Months passed, and the events of that night became a haunting memory, a dark shadow that lingered in my thoughts. I shared my story with a few close friends, but most dismissed it as the ravings of a mind worn down by isolation and fear. Yet, the memory of Eleanor's sorrowful eyes and the desperate whispers refused to fade, haunting my dreams and fueling a relentless curiosity about the supernatural. Years later, I found myself drawn back to Cabin Hollow, compelled by an unexplainable need to return and ensure that Eleanor and her family had found peace. armed with renewed determination and a deep sense of responsibility. I ventured back into the heart of the Alaskan wilderness, the memory of that night guiding me like a beacon through the blinding snow. The house stood as a silent sentinel against the cold, unchanged by time yet bearing the scars of past tragedies. I approached cautiously, the wind whispering through the pines, carrying with it the faintest echoes of Eleanor's voice. Taking a deep breath, I entered the house once more, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation and sorrow. This time, I was prepared. I brought with me items of remembrance, flowers, a candle, and the photograph I had found in the hidden room. As I arranged them on the mantelpiece, the house seemed to breathe around me, the oppressive silence giving way to a gentle stillness. The oil lamp flickered to life once again, but this time, it burned steadily, casting a warm glow that filled the room. I sat down by the fireplace, lighting the candle and placing the flowers beside Eleanor's portrait. "I'm here to help you," I whispered, my voice steady despite the Story number 5. Whispers in the Snow. Winter in rural Canada is a time of both breathtaking beauty and relentless isolation. The vast expanse of snow-covered land stretches as far as the eye can see, broken only by the towering pines of the boreal forest. My name is Mark Davidson, and this is the story of that harrowing winter spent in an old wooden cabin at the edge of Timber Ridge, a tale that would forever change my perception of the wilderness and the spirits that inhabit it. It was late November when my friends and I decided to embark on our annual hunting trip. We were a tight-knit group: Jake, the seasoned hunter; Lisa, the pragmatic one; Tom, always up for an adventure; and me, the one who documented our journeys through photography and writing. This year, we chose Timber Ridge, a remote area known for its abundant wildlife and, as the locals whispered, this haunted past. The cabin we rented was nestled deep within the forest. Far from any signs of civilization, it was an old wooden structure, weathered by time and the harsh Alaskan winters. Despite its dilapidated exterior, it promised warmth and shelter from the impending storm that was forecasted to hit early December. Upon arrival, we were greeted by an eerie silence. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the fresh snow and the occasional hoot of an owl. The cabin itself was modest, with a single room that served as both living and sleeping quarters. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and unused. We unpacked our gear, shared stories around the fading fireplace, and settled in for what we hoped would be a memorable winter. The first few days passed uneventfully. We ventured out each morning, tracking deer and elk through the pristine wilderness. The snow transformed the forest into a serene, almost otherworldly landscape, with each step leaving a perfect imprint in the untouched powder. By evening, we returned to the cabin, sharing our day's adventures over hot coffee and hearty meals. However, as the nights grew longer and the storms more frequent, an unsettling feeling began to settle over us. It started subtly, a creak in the floorboards, the distant sound of something moving in the attic. We dismissed these noises as the natural settling of the old cabin or the wind playing tricks on our ears. But deep down, we couldn't shake the sense that we were not alone. One particularly cold night, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. We huddled together in the living room. The fire finally ignited, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As midnight approached, the temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop suddenly, the warmth of the fire unable to stave off the creeping chill. That's when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the attic floor. The heavy thudding was rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing back and forth up there. Jake, ever the brave one, grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the attic door. "Stay here," I urged, but he was already climbing the narrow staircase, his determination overriding any sense of fear. As he reached the top, the footsteps stopped abruptly. The attic door swung open with a loud creak, and Jake stepped inside, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the darkened space. For a moment, There was nothing, no one in sight. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, a figure standing by the window, her back turned to us. "Jake!" Lisa called softly, her voice tinged with worry. He turned slowly, eyes wide with shock. "There's someone up here." We approached cautiously, the atmosphere thick with tension. The figure turned to face us, revealing the ghostly visage of an old hunter. His clothes were tattered, his face gaunt and hollow, eyes empty yet piercing. Before we could react, he vanished into thin air, leaving behind a cold gust of wind and a trail of footprints leading out of the attic and into the forest. Please, leave us alone," Tom stammered, but the figure reappeared at the doorway, blocking our path. "Why are you here?" Jake demanded, his voice shaky. The ghost hunter let out a low, mournful groan. "They took everything from me, my family, my life. Now, I wander these woods, searching for what was lost." Fear gripped us as we realized the depth of his sorrow and rage. The footprints he left behind were large, unnaturally so, leading into the dense forest. Without warning, he dissipated, leaving us standing in the cold, silent attic. The days that followed were marked by escalating paranormal activity. The footsteps became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by distant gunshots that echoed through the trees. At night, the cabin seemed to come alive with whispers, faint and unintelligible, as if the forest itself was speaking in hushed tones. One evening, driven by a mix of fear and determination, we decided to follow the footprints into the forest, hoping to uncover the truth behind the ghostly hunter. Armed with flashlights and a sense of uneasy purpose, we ventured into the night, the snow crunching beneath our boots. The forest was eerily silent, the trees standing like dark sentinels against the starless sky. The footprints led us deeper into the wilderness, where the snow was thicker and the cold more biting. After hours of searching, we stumbled upon a clearing illuminated by the pale light of the moon. In the center stood the remnants of an old hunting lodge, its structure half buried in snow and ice. As we approached, the air grew colder, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The lodge appeared abandoned, yet a faint glow emanated from within, the same eerie light that had shone from the cabin's attic. We pushed open the heavy door, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the flickering oil lamp on a dusty table. The room was filled with old hunting equipment, trophies from past hunts, and personal belongings left behind in haste. In the corner stood a large portrait of the same hunter we had seen in the attic, his eyes seeming to follow us as we moved. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. "Find me! Help me!" The ghostly hunter appeared before us once more, his presence more tangible than ever. "I can't rest until I find what was taken from me," he implored, his voice echoing through the room. "Please, help me find peace." Realizing that his torment was tied to something lost within the forest, we vowed to assist him. We began searching the lodge for clues, uncovering old journals and maps that hinted at a hidden cache of hunting trophies taken by bandits years ago. It became clear that the hunter had been betrayed, his legacy tarnished by greed and violence. Determined to honor his memory and free his spirit, we set out to locate the hidden stash. The journey was perilous, the cold relentless, but our resolve was unyielding. Guided by the journals and the ghost's intermittent guidance, we navigated treacherous terrain, battling blinding snowstorms and the ever-present sense of being watched. After days of arduous searching, we discovered a concealed cave deep within the forest, its entrance hidden by a thick veil of ice. Inside, we found the stolen trophies, worn rifles, antique knives, and personal mementos that belonged to the hunter's family. As we carefully gathered the items, the atmosphere shifted, the oppressive cold lifting slightly as if the cave itself was releasing its grip. With the trophies secured, we returned to the lodge, placing them on the table where the portrait hung. The ghostly hunter appeared once more, his expression one of profound gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with relief. "Now, I can finally rest." A warm light enveloped the lodge, the shadows dissipating as the spirit of the hunter faded into peace. The whispers ceased, replaced by a serene silence that spoke of closure and tranquility. We left Timber Ridge that winter with a newfound respect for the legends that permeated the wilderness. The cabin stood silent, its haunting presence transformed from one of fear to a symbol of redemption. The ghostly hunter had found his peace, and with it, a piece of our own haunted past had been laid to rest. Years later, I still visit Cabin Creek, now a place of pilgrimage for those who seek to honor the spirits of the forest. The story of our encounter has become a testament to the enduring bonds of friendship and the power of compassion in the face of the unknown. But every winter, as the snow blankets the land and the nights grow long and cold, I can still hear the faint echoes of whispers on the wind, a reminder that some spirits never truly fade away, lingering in the shadows and the snow, forever a part of the wilderness they called home. Because in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness, amidst the endless snow and silent pines, the whispers of the past continue to weave their haunting tales, waiting for those brave enough to listen and compassionate enough to help them find peace. Story number 6. Echoes of Winter. Winter in the mountains of Colorado is a force both beautiful and unforgiving. The snow blankets everything in pristine white, turning the rugged terrain into a serene yet isolating landscape. My name is Sarah Thompson, and this is the story of how our family's Christmas getaway turned into a nightmare we never could have imagined. It was early December when my husband, Tom, our 2 children, Emily and Jack, and I decided to rent an old wooden cabin atop Pine Ridge Mountain. The idea was simple: escape the hustle and bustle of city life, embrace the tranquility of nature, and create lasting memories during the holiday season. The cabin, though weathered and secluded, promised the perfect retreat, with large windows offering breathtaking views of the snow-covered peaks and a cozy fireplace to warm our evenings. It seemed ideal. We arrived on a crisp Saturday afternoon, the sun casting a golden hue over the landscape. The drive up the narrow, winding roads was an adventure in itself, the heavy snowfall making visibility challenging but adding to the excitement. As we approached the cabin, the towering pines stood like silent sentinels against the winter sky, their branches heavy with snow. Inside, the cabin was charmingly rustic. The wooden floors creaked under our footsteps, and the scent of pine and old wood filled the air. We quickly unpacked, eager to settle in and start our holiday. That night, after a hearty dinner, we gathered around the fireplace, the flames dancing and casting warm shadows across the room. The children were excitedly discussing their plans for building snowmen and sledding, while Tom and I enjoyed a quiet moment of relaxation. The first night passed peacefully, the storm outside lending a comforting sense of isolation. However, as midnight approached, an eerie stillness settled over the cabin. The wind howled through the trees, and the snowflakes danced wildly outside the windows. It was then that we heard it, the faint sound of singing, distant and melancholic, carried by the howling wind. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the melody grew louder and more distinct, as if someone were singing right outside the cabin. Emily, ever curious, suggested we check it out. Reluctantly, Tom agreed, thinking it was just another winter oddity. We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously stepped outside into the biting cold. The snow was falling heavily, making it difficult to see beyond a few feet. The singing seemed to emanate from the forest, its haunting melody echoing through the trees. We followed the sound, our footsteps crunching in the fresh snow. But no matter how far we walked, the source remained elusive. The singing faded into silence as abruptly as it had begun, leaving us with a lingering sense of unease. We returned to the warmth of the cabin, trying to shake off the unsettling experience. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel like eyes were watching me. the memory of the singing haunting my thoughts. The following day, we decided to explore the area, hoping to distract ourselves from the unnerving events of the night before. The forest was a winter wonderland, the snow sparkling in the sunlight and the air crisp with cold. As we ventured deeper, we stumbled upon old hiking trails and remnants of past visitors, faded signs and abandoned equipment. It was during one of these explorations that we met an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who lived a short distance away. She welcomed us warmly, despite the biting cold, and offered to share some local history. Over hot cocoa, she recounted the tragic tale of Margaret Whittaker, a woman who had lived in the area during the winter of 1920. Margaret had moved to Pine Ridge with her husband and children, seeking a peaceful life in the mountains. However, a brutal snowstorm had trapped them in their cabin, leading to their untimely deaths. The locals believed that Margaret's spirit lingered, singing through the snow each winter night, forever searching for her lost family. Her story sent a chill down my spine, but Tom and the kids seemed fascinated. We thanked her and returned to the cabin, the tale of Margaret lingering in our minds. That night, the singing returned, more intense and sorrowful than before. The melody was unmistakably that of a woman's voice, filled with longing and despair, determined to uncover the truth. Tom and I decided to investigate further. We searched the cabin for any clues, finding nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of recent visitors, no open doors, nothing that explained the eerie singing. However, as we examined the walls, we noticed something peculiar: a loose panel near the fireplace. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay an old, dusty journal belonging to Margaret Whittaker. The pages were fragile, the ink faded but still legible. We began to read, the words painting a heartbreaking picture of Margaret's desperate attempts to survive the storm and protect her family. As we delved deeper into the journal, the temperature in the cabin dropped noticeably. The fire in the hearth seemed to flicker more violently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Suddenly, the singing filled the room again, louder and more desperate. The children cried out, huddling together in fear, while Tom and I felt an overwhelming presence surrounding us. Determined to help Margaret find peace, we decided to perform a ritual described in her journal, a plea for her spirit to move on and reunite with her family in the afterlife. Following the instructions carefully, we gathered candles, incense, and a small silver cross that Margaret had mentioned as a symbol of protection. As we lit the candles and began to chant the incantation, the cabin seemed to come alive with supernatural energy. The temperature plummeted, our breaths visible in the frigid air, and the singing reached a crescendo of anguish and sorrow. The candles flickered wildly, and the shadows grew darker, twisting into grotesque shapes that clawed at the walls. Margaret's apparition appeared before us, her translucent form shimmering in the candlelight. Her eyes were hollow, yet filled with an unbearable sadness. "Please," she whispered, her voice echoing through the cabin. "Find my family." We continued the ritual, our voices steady despite the fear gripping our hearts. As the final words left our lips, a warm light enveloped the room, and the oppressive cold began to lift. Margaret's spirit looked at us with gratitude before slowly fading into the light, her sorrow finally easing. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a peaceful and pristine landscape. The cabin felt different, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. We packed our belongings and decided to leave early, the events of the past few days leaving us shaken but hopeful. As we drove away, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered mountains. The memory of Margaret's singing and her tragic story remained etched in our minds, a poignant reminder of the lingering spirits that inhabit the untouched corners of the world. Years have passed since that winter in Cabin Creek, but the experience has never left me. It serves as a constant reminder of the thin veil between our world and the next, and the importance of compassion in the face of tragedy. Every winter, When the snow begins to fall and the nights grow long, I can still hear the faint echoes of Margaret's song, a haunting melody carried by the cold winds, a reminder that some spirits never truly find peace until their stories are heard and honored. Because in the heart of winter, amidst the silent snow and the whispering pines, the echoes of the past linger, waiting for someone to listen and help them find their way home. Story number 7. Whispers of Black Mountain. Winter in Maine was unforgiving, especially on the slopes of Black Mountain. The snow piled high, blanketing the world in silence and isolation. I had always sought solace in solitude, which is why renting the old wooden house at the mountain's base seemed like the perfect retreat. My name is Michael Reynolds, and this is the story of my winter at Black Mountain, a season that would forever alter my perception of reality and haunt my nights. I arrived on a biting December afternoon, the sky a dull gray as heavy clouds threatened more snow. The drive up the winding mountain road was treacherous, the narrow path barely visible beneath the thick blanket of white. The house stood solitary, its weathered timbers and sloping roof a testament to years of enduring the harsh winters. Despite its quaint charm, an eerie feeling settled over me as I approached, the wind whispering through the pines like ghostly voices. Inside, the house was a time capsule of a bygone era. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the scent of pine and old wood filled the air. The living room was spacious, dominated by a large stone fireplace that had long since ceased to burn. A sturdy wooden door led to the bedrooms, while another opened to a small kitchen that promised warmth and comfort during the cold nights ahead. I spent the first day unpacking and exploring the surroundings, the serene beauty of the snow-covered landscape providing a much-needed escape from the chaos of city life. As dusk settled, I prepared a simple dinner and settled into an armchair by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and adding to the house's lonely ambience. That night, sleep was elusive. The howling wind and the occasional creak of the old house kept me restless. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into a restless slumber. My dreams were vivid and unsettling, filled with images of the house and its silent, watchful presence. Each time I began to drift into a deep dream, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the house, jolting me awake. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The knocking persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the front door. Gathering my courage, I reached for my coat and flashlight, the icy air seeping through the gaps in the door. With each step toward the entrance, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. I opened the door to find nothing but the swirling snow and the relentless storm outside. Shivering, I closed the door and returned to bed, trying to dismiss the experience as a figment of my weary mind. But as I lay there, the sense of being watched intensified, the shadows in the room seeming to move with a life of their own. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my eyes fixed on the empty doorway, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning, the storm had abated, leaving a pristine silence in its wake. I awoke early, eager to explore the aftermath of the night's fury. As I stepped outside, the world was transformed, the landscape untouched and serene. However, my curiosity was quickly piqued by an odd sight at the front door, a series of large, deep handprints etched into the fresh snow, leading away from the house and disappearing into the dense forest beyond. Confused and unsettled, I examined the prints closely. They were too large to be human, the fingers elongated and the impressions unnaturally deep. No one had been here before me that winter, and the house had no history of recent visitors. The footprints seemed to beckon me into the woods, their eerie presence a stark contrast to the peaceful surroundings. Determined to uncover the truth, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the forest, following the trail of mysterious handprints. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating a canopy that blocked out the daylight. The deeper I walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant call of a lone owl. Hours passed with no sign of the source of the footprints. Just as I began to question my sanity, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the pines. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung crookedly on its hinges. The place exuded an aura of abandonment and sorrow, as if it had been left in a hurry long ago. Gathering my courage, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, the remnants of a past life scattered throughout the room. Dust covered the furniture, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As I explored, a chilling realization dawned on me. The cabin had once belonged to a family who had perished in a tragic accident, their lives cut short by the unforgiving winter. In the corner of the room stood an old portrait, its frame ornate but tarnished by time. The painting depicted a woman in Victorian attire, her eyes hollow and sorrowful, staring directly at me. A shiver ran down my spine as I felt her gaze pierce through me, the image of the woman hauntingly lifelike despite the years that had passed. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the temperature plummeted. I felt an invisible presence, a weight pressing down on me as the air around me thickened with despair. The woman's eyes seemed to follow my every movement, her expression one of profound sadness and longing. I knew then that the house was not just abandoned, it was a vessel for restless spirits, trapped by their untimely deaths and unable to move on. That night, the house was alive with unsettling activity. The knocking returned, louder and more persistent, echoing through the halls and the attic. Each time I tried to sleep, the sound disrupted my dreams, pulling me back into a state of anxious wakefulness. I began to document the occurrences, hoping to make sense of the phenomena that plagued me. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. The knocking grew more aggressive, the sounds of footsteps now accompanied by faint, sorrowful whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Objects moved on their own, books falling from shelves, chairs scraping against the floor, and the portrait's eyes appearing to follow me with an intensifying malevolence. Determined to free the spirits and reclaim my peace, I delved into the history of the house and the tragic family who had once lived there. Through old records and local lore, I discovered that the family had been beloved members of the community. Their lives tragically ended by a deadly avalanche that had struck during a particularly harsh winter. The daughter, in particular, had been known for her beautiful singing voice, a talent that had endeared her to everyone who knew her. It became clear that the spirit I had encountered was that of the daughter, her presence bound to the house by the trauma of her family's sudden and violent demise. Her voice, though silent to the living, echoed through the house each night, a haunting reminder of the loss and sorrow that had befallen them. Armed with this knowledge, I sought to perform a ritual of release, hoping to help the restless spirit find peace and end the torment that had gripped me. The ritual involved creating a sacred space within the house, lighting candles to symbolize hope and forgiveness, and speaking words of comfort and release to guide the spirit toward the afterlife. One frigid evening, as the storm outside raged once more, I set up the ritual in the living room. The candles flickered in the wind, casting dancing shadows that seemed to merge with the ghostly presence in the room. I began to chant, my voice steady despite the fear that clawed at my insides. Spirit of sorrow, hear my plea. Find your peace and let us be. As the final words left my lips, the room seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the candles burned brighter. The portrait shimmered, the woman's eyes softening, and a gentle warmth filled the space. The knocking ceased, replaced by a serene silence that spoke of relief and closure. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me, the weight of the past lifting as the spirit found her way to peace. The house, once a place of torment, now stood quiet and still, the lingering sorrow replaced by a sense of completion. The following morning, the snow had melted away, revealing a clear and peaceful landscape. The cabin stood silent, its wooden walls no longer echoing with the whispers of the past. Packing up my belongings, I felt a sense of liberation, knowing that I had helped to heal the wounds that had kept the spirits bound to the house. As I drove away from Black Mountain, the sun breaking through the clouds and casting a warm glow over the mountains, I reflected on the experience. The winter that had begun as a quest for solitude had transformed into a journey of understanding and compassion. The echoes of the past had taught me the importance of remembering and honoring those who had been lost, their stories a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Years have passed since that winter at Black Mountain, but the memories remain vivid, etched into my mind like the handprints in the snow. The house still stands, a silent guardian of the mountain, its history now a part of the local lore that is shared around campfires and in hushed tones during the long winter nights. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow begins to fall, I can almost hear the faint echoes of a child's song, a reminder of the spirits that once roamed the halls of that old wooden house. The experience taught me that some places hold secrets too powerful to ignore, and that the bonds we form with the past can shape our understanding of the present. If you ever find yourself journeying through the snow-laden trails of Black Mountain, take a moment to listen to the whispers in the wind. Respect the stories etched into the landscape, for they are the echoes of lives lived and lost, forever intertwined with the very essence of the mountain itself. Stay safe, and may your winters be filled with warmth and light, free from the shadows that linger in the coldest of nights.